August 7, 1942, 9 a.m., Guadalcanal, Solomon Islands. Colonel Ichiki stood on the deck of a transport ship heading toward Guadalcanal. His orders were simple: land, destroy the American forces that had invaded the island, and restore Japanese control. August 7, 1942, 9 a.m., Guadalcanal, Solomon Islands. Colonel Ichiki stood on the deck of a transport ship heading toward Guadalcanal. His orders were simple: land, destroy the American forces that had invaded the island, and restore Japanese control. Ichiki was confident. His 916th Infantry Regiment, the Ichiki detachment, consisted of elite troops who'd fought in China and trained for amphibious operations. They were disciplined, experienced, and imbued with bushido spirit. The Americans they faced, Marines, barely trained civilians in uniform, soft products of a decadent democracy, undisciplined, poorly led, incapable of withstanding a determined Japanese assault. Ichiki told his officers, "We will attack at night. The Americans will panic. They will break. By dawn, the airfield will be ours." August 21, 1942, Tuapagi, Tenaru River, Guadalcanal. Ichiki's regiment attacked across the Tenaru River sandbar exactly as planned. His soldiers charged American positions, screaming, bayonets fixed, expecting the Marines to flee in terror. What happened instead would shock the Japanese military and shatter assumptions that had guided their Pacific strategy. The Marines didn't break. They held their positions in the darkness and systematically slaughtered Ichiki's regiment with rifle fire, machine guns, and artillery. As dawn broke, Marine tanks crossed the river and crushed the remaining Japanese soldiers against the beach. Of Ichiki's 916 soldiers, 774 were killed. The Marines suffered 44 casualties total. Colonel Ichiki, discovering that his spiritually superior force had been annihilated by the soft Americans, burned his regiment's colors and shot himself. This was the first major ground combat between American and Japanese forces. It wouldn't be the last. For 6 months, Guadalcanal would become a meat grinder where Japanese assumptions about American soldiers died, along with over 20,000 Japanese troops. This is the story of how United States Marines proved that everything Japan believed about them was wrong. How Guadalcanal became the graveyard of Japanese invincibility, and how a generation of young Americans demonstrated that courage, determination, and fighting spirit weren't exclusive to any nation or culture, and that underestimating your enemy is the most dangerous assumption in warfare. The Japanese assumptions, what they believed about Americans. To understand what happened at Guadalcanal, you need to understand what Japanese commanders believed about Americans in August 1942. The propaganda and cultural beliefs. Japanese military culture in 1942 was built on several assumptions. Japanese spiritual superiority, bushido, warrior code, gave Japanese soldiers unmatched fighting spirit. Willingness to die for emperor made Japanese unstoppable. Western materialism made Western soldiers fear death and thus weak. American softness, Americans were spoiled by easy living and democracy. American individualism meant they couldn't function under discipline. Americans lacked the spiritual strength to endure hardship. Americans would quit when fighting became difficult. Racial theories. Japanese were racially superior to Western peoples. Western decadence had made them physically and morally weak. Japanese military tradition gave them inherent advantages. Evidence they cited. Japanese commanders pointed to easy victories, Through 1942, Japan had conquered Philippines, defeating American and Filipino forces, British Malaya and Singapore, crushing supposedly elite British troops, Dutch East Indies, overwhelming Dutch defenders, Burma, defeating British and Commonwealth forces. Prisoner behavior. Allied soldiers who surrendered, culturally unthinkable for Japanese, seemed to confirm weakness. Apparent lack of resistance. The speed of Japanese victories suggested enemy forces lacked will to fight. The specific Guadalcanal assessment. When intelligence reported Americans had landed on Guadalcanal, Japanese commanders assessed. Size, small force, probably lightly armed. Quality, garrison troops or second-line forces, not elite units. Morale, isolated on remote island, vulnerable to psychological pressure. Combat capability, Americans had no jungle warfare experience, would be unable to fight effectively in tropical conditions. Solution, send a regiment of elite infantry. They would overwhelm the American garrison in a night attack. The operation would take days at most. Every single assumption was wrong. August 7, 1942. The invasion, what the Marines actually were. The Americans who landed on Guadalcanal were not the soft, untrained garrison troops Japanese intelligence expected. The 1st Marine Division. Commander, Major General Alexander Vandergrift. Composition, 1st and 5th Marine Regiments, veteran units, 11,000 combat troops initially, eventually reinforced to 60,000. Additional naval construction battalions, Seabees, supporting artillery, engineers, and logistics. Training. The Marines who landed had intensive infantry training, far exceeding Japanese estimates. Amphibious warfare training, Marines were specialists in this, physical conditioning that matched or exceeded Japanese soldiers, modern weapons and tactics. More importantly, Marine culture. The United States Marine Corps had its own warrior tradition. Pride. Marines saw themselves as elite, first to fight. Esprit de corps, unit cohesion and loyalty as strong as any Japanese unit. Aggression. Marine training emphasized offensive spirit and closing with the enemy. Discipline. Despite democratic culture, Marine discipline was rigid and effective. The Japanese had assumed all Americans were soft. They'd failed to recognize that American culture, like any large culture, contained both soft elements and hard elements, and the Marines represented the latter. The Tenaru River, August 21, 1942, assumptions meet reality. The Battle of the Tenaru River was the first major test of Japanese assumptions about American forces. Colonel Ichiki's plan. Force, approximately 916 elite infantry from the Ichiki detachment, advance element of larger force. Tactics, night attack, Japanese preferred tactic. Cross Tenaru River sandbar. Overrun American positions with bayonet charge. Capture Henderson Field, the airfield. Expected result. Americans would panic and flee. By dawn, victory would be complete. What actually happened? 2 a.m., August 21st, Ichiki's force attacked across the Tenaru River sandbar. American response. Lieutenant Colonel Edwin Pollock's 2nd Battalion, 1st Marines held positions along the river, established defensive line with interlocking fields of fire, positioned machine guns to cover sandbar crossing, had artillery pre-registered on likely attack routes, waited in disciplined silence for Japanese to close range. The Japanese charge. Ichiki's soldiers charged across the sandbar, screaming to intimidate enemy. Bayonets fixed for close combat, expecting Americans to break. What they encountered. Marines opened fire at close range. M1919 machine guns cut down Japanese in groups. Riflemen fired controlled aimed shots. 37mm anti-tank guns fired canister shot like giant shotguns into massed Japanese. Artillery dropped shells among Japanese forces. The Japanese kept coming. Following doctrine, they continued attacking despite casualties, expecting American morale to break. The Americans didn't break. Marines held positions and maintained disciplined fire. The slaughter. For hours, Japanese soldiers charged into Marine positions and were systematically killed. Bodies piled up on the sandbar. The attack became a massacre. Dawn counterattack. At first light, Lieutenant Colonel Leonard Creswell's 1st Battalion crossed the river upstream and attacked Japanese from the flank. Marine M3 Stuart light tanks crossed the river and crushed the remaining Japanese soldiers against the beach, literally crushing them with the tank treads. The result: Japanese casualties, 774 killed out of 916, 84% casualties. American casualties, 44 total, 35 killed, 9 wounded. Kill ratio, approximately 17-1 in favor of Marines. Colonel Ichiki burned his regiment's colors and committed suicide, unable to accept the catastrophic defeat. Bloody Ridge, September 12 to 14, 1942. The desperate defense. The Tenaru River should have taught Japanese commanders that their assumptions were wrong. Instead, they sent more forces with the same tactics. The Japanese plan. Force: approximately 6,000 troops under Major General Kiyotake Kawaguchi. Tactics: night infiltration through jungle. Converge on Henderson Field from multiple directions. Overwhelm American defenses with superior numbers. Expected result: the larger force would succeed where Ichiki's smaller force had failed. The terrain. A ridge south of Henderson Field, later called Edson's Ridge or Bloody Ridge, was key terrain. 1,000 yards long. Dominated approaches to airfield, covered in kunai grass and jungle. The defenders: Lieutenant Colonel Merritt, Red Mike Edson's 1st Raider Battalion and 1st Parachute Battalion. Force: approximately 700 Marines, outnumbered nearly 9-1. Mission: hold the ridge and prevent Japanese from reaching Henderson Field. The battle, September 12 to 14. Night attacks. Japanese forces attacked in waves through darkness. Japanese tactics: mass infantry charges. Night infiltration, banzai attacks with bayonets. Psychological warfare, screaming, beating weapons against trees. Marine defenses, September 12 to 13, first night. Japanese attacked in waves. Marines used artillery extensively, pre-registered fire on likely attack routes, maintained defensive discipline despite being surrounded at points, conducted fighting withdrawals when positions became untenable, reformed defensive lines and counterattacked at dawn. September 13 to 14, second night. Japanese launched maximum effort. Marines were down to final defensive line in some sectors. Called artillery fire on their own positions when Japanese overran them. Fought hand-to-hand combat in places. Refused to retreat despite desperate circumstances. Edson's leadership. Lieutenant Colonel Edson moved among his men throughout the battle. Accounts from Marines present. Edson walked the line under fire like he was inspecting the guard on a Sunday afternoon. When Marines started falling back, he'd appear and say in his quiet voice, "Hold this line. They can't break us." And we believed him. So we held. The result: after 2 nights of desperate fighting, Japanese casualties, approximately 1,200 to 1,500 killed. Marine casualties, approximately 104 killed, 278 wounded. Outcome: Japanese attack failed. Henderson Field remained secure. Medal of Honor. Edson received the Medal of Honor for his leadership during the battle. John Basilone, October 24th to 25th, 1942, one man, two machine guns. As Japanese assaults continued through September and October, individual acts of heroism became legendary. The situation. October 24th to 25th, Japanese launched another major assault, the largest yet, aiming to recapture Henderson Field. Force, approximately 15,000 to 20,000 Japanese troops attacking across multiple sectors. One Marine stand. Gunnery Sergeant John Basilone commanded a machine gun section at a critical defensive position. The attack, night of October 24th to 25th. Japanese forces attacked Basilone's position in waves. What happened over approximately 10 hours became one of the most famous individual actions in Marine Corps history. Basilone's defense. Operating two M1917.30 caliber water-cooled machine guns. Fired continuously at attacking Japanese forces. Ran ammunition through tropical rain and darkness. Repaired gun when it jammed under fire. When gun barrel overheated and water coolant ran out, urged on barrel, burning his hands and arms, to continue firing. Single-handedly held position against regimental strength Japanese assault. When ammunition ran low, Basilone made multiple trips through enemy fire to resupply ammunition. Crossed open ground under fire. Brought ammunition back to gun positions. Returned to firing position and continued fighting. When one gun was destroyed, moved to second gun. Continued firing. Killed approximately 38 Japanese soldiers, confirmed, likely many more. The result? Basilone's position held. The Japanese assault in his sector failed. Recognition. Medal of Honor presented by Lieutenant General Alexander Vandergrift personally. Promoted to platoon sergeant. Became national hero used in war-bond drives. Later returned to combat, against orders, and was killed at Iwo Jima in 1945. The significance. Basilone's stand demonstrated individual Marine courage matched or exceeded Japanese claims of superior fighting spirit. American soldiers could endure extreme conditions and continue fighting. Marines would hold positions against overwhelming odds. Everything Japanese propaganda said only Japanese soldiers could do, Marines were doing. Jacob Vouza, the coast watcher who wouldn't break. Not all heroes at Guadalcanal were American. One of the most remarkable stories was a Solomon Islander who embodied exactly the courage and determination Japanese claimed was theirs alone. Jacob Vouza. Background: British Solomon Islands police sergeant before war, recruited as coast watcher, intelligence gatherer, to observe Japanese movements. Mission: provide intelligence to Allied forces about Japanese activities. The capture, August 1942. Japanese patrols captured Vouza carrying a small American flag, gift from Marines. The interrogation. Japanese soldiers tortured Vouza to learn about American positions and strength. Beat him severely. Tied him to a tree. Bayoneted him 7 times. Cut his throat. Left him for dead. The escape. Vouza, despite massive injuries, regained consciousness, chewed through ropes binding him, crawled and stumbled several miles through jungle, reached Marine lines hours before Japanese attack on Tenaru River, warned Marines of coming assault, provided intelligence about Japanese strength and positions. The survival, despite wounds that should have been fatal, survived through emergency surgery, recovered eventually, continued working as scout for Marines, received Silver Star and other decorations. The significance. Vouza's courage demonstrated that determination and bravery weren't exclusive to any nation. His refusal to betray Allied forces despite torture contradicted Japanese claims of spiritual superiority. His warning enabled Marines to prepare for Ichiki's attack, contributing to that battle's outcome. The grinding months, September to December, Negentian, Tui and Vertig. Beyond the famous battles, Guadalcanal became a campaign of attrition that destroyed Japanese assumptions about American staying power. The conditions? Both sides suffered. Disease, malaria, nearly every man on island contracted it eventually. Dysentery, fungal infections, tropical ulcers, food shortages. Japanese supply lines were disrupted by American air and naval power. Americans faced supply problems early, but improved logistics. Both sides dealt with inadequate rations, exhaustion, constant combat alerts, night attacks, Japanese specialty, tropical heat and humidity, inadequate rest. The Japanese expectation. Japanese commanders believed Americans would crack under these conditions. Soft Americans couldn't endure hardship. Disease and hunger would destroy morale. Isolated garrison would lose will to fight. The American response: Marines endured conditions as bad as or worse than Japanese faced. Marine accounts. We were sick. We were hungry. We were exhausted. But we were still Marines. Japanese attacked at night. We killed them. They attacked again the next night. We killed them again. They thought we'd quit. We didn't quit. We just kept killing Japanese until they stopped coming. The comparative endurance. Japanese forces suffered from supply shortages worse than Americans. Starvation Island became Japanese nickname for Guadalcanal. Disease and hunger degraded combat effectiveness. Morale deteriorated as defeats accumulated. American forces maintained combat effectiveness despite hardships. Supply situation improved as sea and air control increased. Morale sustained by small victories and belief in eventual success. Fresh reinforcements arrived periodically. The realization. By late 1942, Japanese commanders realized Americans were enduring conditions Japanese thought would break them. The soft Americans were proving as tough as Japanese soldiers and had better logistics. The naval battles, control of the sea. Guadalcanal wasn't just a ground campaign. Naval battles determined who could supply and reinforce forces on the island. The Tokyo Express. Rat Run. Japanese destroyers made high-speed night runs to deliver supplies and reinforcements, operated at night to avoid American air attack, delivered troops and supplies, bombarded Marine positions, attempted to disrupt American control. American naval response. Series of brutal naval battles off Guadalcanal. Battle of Savo Island, August 9th. Japanese victory sank 4 Allied cruisers. Battle of Cape Esperance, October 11th to 12th. American tactical victory. Naval Battle of Guadalcanal, November 12 to 15. Decisive American victory stopped Japanese major reinforcement effort. Battle of Tassafaronga, November 30. Japanese tactical victory, but couldn't change strategic situation. The result? By December 1942, Americans controlled seas around Guadalcanal sufficiently to maintain supply. Japanese couldn't deliver enough supplies to sustain their forces. Starvation Island nickname reflected Japanese supply failure. The strategic impact. Naval control determined the campaign. Americans could reinforce and resupply. Japanese couldn't sustain their forces. Ground battle outcome was decided partly by sea control. December 1942 to February 1943, the Japanese withdrawal. By December, Japanese High Command faced reality. Guadalcanal was lost. The Japanese assessment. What they'd learned. American Marines were not soft. They were formidable infantry. American combat effectiveness improved rapidly with experience. American logistics and supply were superior. American air and naval power could control sea lanes. Japanese forces couldn't sustain operations under these conditions. The decision. Late December 1942, Japanese Imperial Headquarters decided to withdraw from Guadalcanal. The rationale: forces on Guadalcanal were starving and combat ineffective. Reinforcement would cost ships and men Japan couldn't afford. Resources needed elsewhere, New Guinea especially. Better to withdraw and establish defense further north. Operation KE Evacuation. February 1st to 7th, 1943, Japanese conducted nighttime evacuation. Destroyers made high-speed runs to evacuate troops. Approximately 10,000 to 11,000 soldiers evacuated out of 30,000 plus sent to island, executed successfully despite American attempts to interfere. The Americans didn't realize initially. Marines thought Japanese were reinforcing, not evacuating. Only when patrols found abandoned positions did they realize Japanese had withdrawn. The cost. Japanese losses on Guadalcanal. Approximately 19,000 to 25,000 killed. Estimates vary. Most deaths from disease and starvation, not combat. Dozens of ships and aircraft lost. American losses. Approximately 7,000 casualties total. 1,600 killed. 29 ships sunk. Significant aircraft losses. Ratio. Japanese suffered approximately 3-to-1 higher casualties despite being on defensive for latter part of campaign. The aftermath. What Guadalcanal changed. Guadalcanal was a turning point for multiple reasons. Strategic. First Allied ground offensive victory in Pacific showed Japan could be defeated. Ended Japanese expansion. Japan never again went on strategic offensive. American confidence. Proved U.S. could fight effectively in Pacific. Set pattern. Island hopping campaign strategy emerged from Guadalcanal lessons. Tactical. American adaptation. Marines learned jungle warfare, night fighting, and coordination with naval/air forces. Japanese rigidity. Japanese tactics didn't evolve, kept using same failed approaches. Equipment lessons. Americans improved weapons, supplies, and equipment based on Guadalcanal experiences. Psychological. Most important, the myth of Japanese invincibility was destroyed. For Americans. Before Guadalcanal, many American commanders weren't sure Marines could match Japanese soldiers. After Guadalcanal, Americans knew they could beat Japanese forces. For Japanese. Before Guadalcanal, Japanese commanders believed spiritual superiority made them unbeatable. After Guadalcanal, Japanese commanders knew Americans were formidable opponents who would endure hardships and fight effectively. The assumption cascade. Guadalcanal shattered interlocking Japanese assumptions. Americans are soft. Americans proved as tough as Japanese. Americans panic under pressure. Americans maintain discipline under extreme stress. Americans lack fighting spirit. Americans fought with courage matching Japanese claims. Americans can't endure hardship. Americans endured conditions as bad as Japanese faced. Japanese spiritual superiority ensures victory. Courage exists in all cultures. Superiority claims were propaganda. Every assumption was wrong, and Guadalcanal proved it. The Medals of Honor, recognizing extreme valor. Guadalcanal produced multiple Medal of Honor recipients, America's highest military decoration, demonstrating the level of courage displayed. Recipients partial list. Major General Alexander Vandergrift, overall commander for leadership throughout campaign. Lieutenant Colonel Merritt Edson, for Bloody Ridge defense. Gunnery Sergeant John Basilone, for machine gun defense, October 24th to 25th. Platoon Sergeant Mitchell Page, for similar machine gun defense action. Others, multiple additional Marines received the Medal of Honor for actions on Guadalcanal. The significance. The concentration of Medal of Honor actions demonstrated individual Marine courage was extraordinary. Marines would fight under desperate circumstances. American soldiers possessed the fighting spirit Japanese claimed was uniquely theirs. The Japanese perspective. Japanese commanders recognized the quality of their opponents. Post-war accounts acknowledged. The Americans we fought at Guadalcanal were not the soft soldiers we expected. They were tough, disciplined, and brave. Our assumptions about American weakness were propaganda, not reality. Conclusion. The island where assumptions died. August 1942. Japanese commanders believed American Marines were soft, undisciplined products of decadent democracy who would flee from determined Japanese attacks. February 1943. Japanese forces withdrew from Guadalcanal, having learned that every assumption was catastrophically wrong. What happened? At Tenaru River, Colonel Ichiki's elite regiment was annihilated by Marines who didn't break, didn't panic, and systematically slaughtered attackers. At Bloody Ridge, 700 Marines held against 6,000 Japanese attackers for 2 desperate nights. At Henderson Field perimeter, John Basilone and other Marines fought all night against regimental strength assaults and held their positions. Across 6 months, Marines endured disease, hunger, exhaustion, and constant combat, and never broke. The verdict. American Marines were not soft. They were as tough as any soldiers in the war. American Marines were not undisciplined. Their fire discipline and tactical coordination exceeded Japanese forces. American Marines were not cowards. They fought with courage matching Japanese claims of bushido spirit. The lesson. Underestimating your enemy is the most dangerous assumption in warfare. Japanese commanders built strategy on cultural stereotypes and propaganda rather than realistic assessment. They assumed American democracy and capitalism made Americans inherently weak. They were wrong, and 20,000 plus Japanese soldiers died on Guadalcanal proving it. The broader truth? Courage, determination, and fighting spirit aren't exclusive to any culture or nation. Every society produces both soft individuals and hard individuals. Every military force properly trained and led can produce effective soldiers. Japanese claims of unique spiritual superiority were propaganda, and dangerous propaganda because believing it led to catastrophic tactical and strategic errors. The Marine legacy. Guadalcanal became sacred in Marine Corps history because it proved what Marines believed about themselves. They were elite infantry who could fight and win against any enemy. The battles, Tenaru, Bloody Ridge, Henderson Field, became part of Marine Corps mythology. The names Edson, Basilone, Vandergrift, Vouza became legends taught to every Marine recruit. But the deeper legacy was proving that American soldiers could match any opponent when properly trained, led, and motivated. The Japanese reckoning. For Japan, Guadalcanal was more than a military defeat. It was the destruction of a worldview. The propaganda that had sustained Japanese expansion, that spiritual superiority made Japanese forces invincible, was exposed as false. Japanese commanders would have to fight the rest of the war, knowing their enemies were as capable, as brave, and as determined as they were, and with superior industrial capacity and logistics backing them. 6 months. One island. Everything changed. The Marines who waded ashore on Guadalcanal on August 7, 1942, were untested in combat against Japanese forces. The Marines who left Guadalcanal in February 1943 had proven they could fight and win. Japanese assumptions died on that island, along with over 20,000 Japanese soldiers who paid the price for their commander's catastrophic underestimation of American fighting men. Guadalcanal, the island where the myth of invincibility was destroyed. The island where Japanese assumptions met American reality. The island where young Marines proved that everything the enemy believed about them was wrong.